Hello and welcome to this Ask Microsoft Anything on Device Health Attestation. My name is Dave Randall. I'm a product manager in the Intune engineering team, and I'm joined today by Bill and Prakar. Bill, do you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll move to Prakar?
Hello, I'll try to keep my intro brief because we have a short time here. Hi, I'm Bill Colero. Been with Microsoft for about 8 years now. First, I was what's called a CXE, or Customer Experience Engineer, helping customers deploy the Intune service at scale. Now I have an awesome opportunity. I'm actually a PM, a product manager for resource access and compliance. So great to be here.
Awesome. Prakar?
Great. Thank you, Bill. Hi, everyone. I'm Prakar Srivastav. I am also a PM. I'm on the Windows security side, and I've been with Microsoft for 6 years working in the security space. I'm now working with Bill with Intune and Windows device health attestation.
That's excellent. So thank you both for being here. I'm really excited. This has been a great Tech Takeoff week, and I think this is a great topic to continue on for day 4. So just to set the stage a little bit, Bill, can you talk a little bit, maybe just a minute or so on what is device compliance and how does that really play into device health attestation?
Sure. So just the topic itself of device compliance could be a 30, 40-minute session, but at a high level, Intune compliance, the value or the power of Intune compliance comes when you add on Azure Active Directory conditional access, right? Mm-hmm. So essentially within Intune, we have a series of compliance policies per platform. And again, each of the respective compliance policies for platform accentuate all of the various attributes for that platform. And you have the ability to check on a setting, whether it comes from a security perspective, a risk perspective, ensuring that you're meeting minimum OS requirements, patch level requirements, et cetera. And right. Then essentially Intune checks on the state of that device and will give it a compliance state of yes or no. Is it compliant or not compliant? Or maybe the compliance state is not yet available. Based on that, that gets fed into Azure Active Directory, which then you can actually have conditional access policies on top of that you can assess, whether there's a risk issue, is the device compliant or not. Then based on that, you can grant or block or enforce MFA scenarios or enforce session controls to restrict content downloads, restrict data leak scenarios to various applications in the cloud or even on-prem applications, right? In particular, Microsoft 365 always comes to the forefront as one of those apps that we want to protect.
Sure. So in there, you talked a little bit about some of the signals, and I think that's kind of where you come in, Prakar. Can you talk a little bit about specifically device health attestation and why is it important in this particular scenario?
Yeah, absolutely. So device health attestation is a very Windows-centric feature that we've built. What we've realized is there is a lot of important aspects about security that take place during the boot. It links to the hardware, the firmware that you're running. A lot of things happen during the boot, Windows bootloaders, kernel, and all that security goodness that happens. Mm-hmm. Those are very critical for everything that you do in your normal usage of Windows. So device health attestation essentially looks at whatever happened during your boot and tells you, hey, things are looking good or bad. And there are certain aspects of security that are bound in the hardware. There are certain security features that require hardware specifics. So we validate all of those as part of an attestation statement, and we hand it as a security signal to Intune to then sort of work it up into compliance.
Sure.
So yeah, we are trying to make sure your Windows booted up healthy and wasn't compromised from the very start.
Got it. So we've got a question from the audience that kind of directly relates to exactly what you talked about. And that is, once a device is in the desired configuration, do we have to restart the device to update the device health attestation state, or what else might trigger the reporting into Intune compliance monitoring? Great question.
Yeah, I can take that. So
Sure.
how attestation is designed is there are a lot of aspects of boot, obviously, that happens once during the boot. And that is the status that gets reported into Intune right after your devices has booted up. And from there on, Intune and your device does a periodic handshake for this attestation report, where we will revalidate all the events again. And if there were newer events that got added to the list of things that happen later in your OS. Additionally, I want to say there are certain features that might require a reboot. That is a feature setting, but attestation by itself sort of captures everything that happens from the boot till your OS booted up, and then some events during the lifetime of your session. So it is per boot as well as periodic, and that is where we feed into Intune. That way you have a more continuous check of compliance.
Got
Bill,
it.
I hope I didn't miss something there.
No, I may. We'll see how the questions progress. There is a scenario with BitLocker where a question always comes to the forefront with many of the customers that I've engaged with previously in my previous role and now as a PM. But there's a question that always comes up in relation to the device health settings within the Windows compliance policy. So essentially, there are 3 settings in there, right? Require BitLocker, require, what is it with the other ones?
Secure boot and code integrity.
That's right. In particular, require BitLocker. There's a scenario where if you're checking for the presence of BitLocker, that the device is going to boot up, and if, let's just say, you set a policy after the device was enrolled or at some later state in the device's life cycle, you chose to require BitLocker. So in that sense, BitLocker will not be present, right? And then the process of encrypting the drive starts to happen, but it didn't happen at boot time, right? It wasn't present at boot time. So the device would come up as not compliant, right? So in that scenario, when the device were to reboot, the device health attestation report would kick off. We'd read the appropriate state of that BitLocker setting for required BitLocker, and then the device would turn, and so you would get the device becoming compliant, and then of course access to resources would become available. But that is a scenario that a reboot is required.
So we've got another question from one of our watchers. Are there any plans for adding additional capability to Intune to resolve various device health configuration issues? Understandably, detecting changes is important, but it seems quite tedious right now to actually bring machines up to a state where measuring those changes becomes important. As a more concrete example, Intune's device health report saying that a machine has early launch anti-malware or data execution prevention disabled is good, but are there plans for adding a way to trivially these machines into the correct state, or get these machines into the correct state? Security baselines can't configure all ASR rules, so those are out of the question. Thoughts from either of you, Bill or Prakar? I know that was kind of a long question.
That was a long question.
Apologies for that. So are there any plans for adding additional capability to Intune to resolve device health configuration issues? I think that's kind of the root of it.
So, well, today the compliance policies do not remediate the device, right? They simply check for the presence of the setting that you're looking for. Is it enables? It is set at a particular value that you've decided to look for. Providing the remediation of that setting, what we're trying to do is improve the user experience when the device goes out of compliance, and provide that user through company portal or the web company portal sort of an improved walkthrough experience. But that's an ongoing, ever evolving, ever improvement phase
Right.
that we take on ourselves, right, to make that a better experience for the end user.
Yep.
Um,
And
Carl,
I
you have
think that
anything to add?
I think the question kind of gets to a little bit more of automated administrative type remediations. Obviously, not everything can be addressed remotely, so we do need some end user interaction for some of those remediations. But anything that we've got for being able to do some automated remediations to get them back into compliant state.
I think I'll take as a follow-on question, because in particular,
Okay.
my focus is around the device health attestation area, and my partner, who's also working on compliance overall, and those experiences on improving the remediation and perhaps the auto remediation in such an event would have a better response. But I know that
Great.
if, in terms of the compliance policy itself, what could be done is that you could, let's just say the device falls out of compliance. You can actually choose to have different states of informing the end user that the device has fallen out of compliance. You don't necessarily have to flat out reject them and call the device not compliant. You can actually email the end user. You could send the user a notification. You can, again, delay the actual event for being out of compliance. So those are some additional flexibilities that the admins have.
Got it. So it's actually, you bring up a good point, Bill, and that is for all of our members of the audience, because this is a live AMA and we might need to bring in a couple of other folks to answer some of the questions that you've submitted online. Thank you for providing those questions. But if we need to bring in some other folks, we're going to leave the comments open for the rest of the week, and folks from the product group will be answering those questions. We'll continue to fill in those answers. So if we don't happen to get to your answer during this call, or we need a little bit of additional support to fill in the answer, please check back periodically, and we'll get those questions answered. Okay, so we've got another question from Twitter this time. Should I assign the BitLocker and encryption compliance policies to a device or user group? My scenario is for Autopilot, where the main user is also the user that enrolled the device through Autopilot. Great question. Thanks, Jan. Thoughts from either of you on assigning compliance policies to devices or user groups?
In terms of the compliance policy, I would suggest you assign the policy to the user groups, right? Not the device groups. It's just been a best practice. Faster remediation or faster checking of the results of that compliance policy back to the service. Awesome. That's my guidance at the moment.
Okay, great. Next question: does it make sense to enable both of these settings? And I think this is again on the BitLocker and the require encryption. It seems that require encryption setting is evaluated more frequently, and perhaps it would at least indicate if the state reported by device health attestation is outdated.
I knew this question was going to come.
Sure.
So it's actually a pretty long answer. So let me dig into it.
Okay. Perfect.
So you've got two settings within the Windows compliance policy. So I think it's under security. You've got require encryption of data storage on the device, right? And that's in particular, that's looking for the OS drive or the system drive. And then you've got the device health attestation settings that says require BitLocker. These are actually two different CSPs that are evaluated, right? So the first, which is require encryption on the data storage of the device, that's checking for the presence of actual encryption being enabled on the OS drive. And by the way, it only supports BitLocker encrypting that OS drive. A third-party encryption provider we won't check have the ability to check on the state of whether it's encrypted or not. It's just specifically tied to BitLocker. I will post, or I don't know if we've already started to post some of these deep links for the docs, but essentially that's checking for the presence of encryption. Right? And it will just check that on every time the device checks in, it's going to check for that presence of encryption, right? The second setting, which is the required BitLocker, right, within the device health settings of the policy. Now that's checking for BitLocker, the presence of BitLocker being enabled at boot time, right? And that actually looks for, as part of device enrollment, there is a CSP that gets set if it's not set already. And a lot of MDMs actually enable this setting on Windows. It's the require retrieve health certificate on boot CSP. And I think I've also provided a link to that because I knew this question was going to get asked.
Up on screen there.
Yeah. So essentially that setting requires a supported TPM chip on the device. Now, some devices we've seen some support for TPM 1.2 and 2.0, but it's usually 2.0 is the requirement, right?
Yeah.
Now, after the MDM enrollment, that CSP is set. And because that CSP is set, it causes the device to generate what's called a device health attestation report, right? Which then is used to read all the settings within the device. And it will also, when you enable or require BitLocker within the DHA setting in the compliance policy, that also triggers us to start populating the Windows Health Attestation report within Monitor in the Intune Mem console, right? So long story short, required encryption on data storage is checking constantly. It's checking within device check-in time every 8 hours if the device is encrypted. Mm-hmm. But the require on BitLocker is based on the device health attestation, and at boot time was BitLocker enabled on the device. Wow.
So, yes, long story, and even the long story short added a little bit more long.
There's always nuance. There's always a nuance.
Sure. So, actually, we've got a good follow-on question from one of the members of the audience. They say, I'm seeing cases where Intune reports a computer as compliant with the require BitLocker setting, but shows an error status for the require encryption setting with remediation failed. If BitLocker is enabled at boot time per DHA and hasn't been suspended since, what would cause this error status for the require encryption setting?
I do know that if there is no TPM present on the device, then if those values are enabled within the Windows compliance policy, mm-hmm. then the return state should be not applicable. If at the time that we request or check on the value of require BitLocker on boot, and we haven't received the device health attestation report yet, it could come up as error. And so maybe you're seeing that behavior. Ultimately, I suggest opening up a support case if what you're seeing is slightly off from what I'm suggesting here.
Yeah. Let's see some feedback. It'd be nice to have a way to revalidate the device health, for example, in the mentioned case of BitLocker, while in the OS instead of only during boot, maybe by PowerShell, manual button, etc. Any thoughts? I mean, great feedback. Love that. Have there been any discussions about being able to do device health validation while in the OS?
So I can take that. With Windows 11, we introduced a new set of CSP nodes that lets the caller re-invoke an attestation statement. There are also numerous improvements that have been done in the Windows security space that sort of do a dynamic runtime measurement state to look at, hey, we did boot up correctly, but we are not very sure. Let's reevaluate a lot of things. So yes, with Windows 11, we have CSP nodes that we've introduced, which take advantage of the attestation service to re-trigger an attestation at any runtime statement. So we will go back and revalidate a lot of things that happened. And yeah.
So along those lines, thanks Prakar for that. Along those lines, Rudy asked, he said, we need to have a reboot regarding the BitLocker CSP issue where protection is only enabled after logging in. So we need to have a reboot to make sure that we can report the status to the device health attestation service. And in that time, the device isn't compliant, and with conditional access in place, end user could end up with a not working device until reboot. So the question is, any advice on how we could deliver a better experience? For example, would setting the grace period work? Switching to PowerShell to enable BitLocker during the device phase? Just kind of interested in whether or not Bill or Prakar, you have any thoughts for Rudy on how we might be able to help address that for his users.
Sure. So my guidance would be for now is essentially have a grace period, and within that grace period, have an email that gets sent out with a notification with that particular scenario mapped out for the user, right? Obviously, in pretty much layman terms, that is a friendly end user communication. It suggests, hey, if your device is out of compliance for BitLocker, please reboot your device. Again, that's a suggestion based on just providing a means of communicating to the end user. Right. And I'm just wondering if any of the sidecar PowerShell abilities would become handy here, right? Where you can potentially do a WMI call, check on that state, and then issue a device reboot via some of the PowerShell capability that we offer within Windows.
A couple of good suggestions. I know I've received some emails when I've had things that I need to do to keep my device up to compliance. So good suggestions. Thanks, Bill. So Nathan has a question. Why evaluate a device's health per user? I can see per logon, or maybe just before a conditional access test. Any thoughts on why that's done? That evaluation is done per user.
The conditional access?
The device health evaluation.
So I think I can take that. The
Sure.
device health attestation is per device. A user can have multiple devices, and then it's actually the device that will lose access to resources if it's non-compliant, and not the user. So if you have multiple devices, one can be out of compliance, the other is still meeting compliance standards, and it's evaluated as a user access, user auth in that token. But yeah, we do it all like every device gets evaluated for that user, whichever the user is connected to. And as I said, you could have some devices out of compliance, some under compliance, and then that's how it works.
Okay. We're getting close to the end of our session. It's gone by really quick. Thank you both, Bill and Prakar. But I've got a couple of final thoughts maybe from one of our audience. And Andrew says, the documentation for device health attestation and communication service flows with the device health attestation cloud service appears to have been heavily updated in the past year or so. We had issues with the new fleet of PCs and device health attestation and could find info in the past. Great job on the doc updates and service flow diagrams to assist in understanding. So great. I mean, kudos to both of you for providing some.
I think that's Prakar.
That's great.
It's good to get some feedback like this.
Yeah. So With that, it's time to close. I want to thank everyone for joining. And thank you, Bill. Thank you, Prakar, for all of your great insights. And we'll see you next time.
Wow, that was really fast.
Yep.
It does
Thanks,
go by
everybody.
quick.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dave.